Sentry mode activated. Target acquired.
Hey there hunters, and welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Today's topic is obviously about elemental ammo for both light bowgun and heavy bowgun. Although heavy bowgun's kind of a back burner thing, we'll get to that at the end. This took a while only because I needed so many augments for bowguns, and I'm still not done with them, but I've done enough testing that I think I have a pretty good idea here. There's a lot to talk about here besides just the sets, so strap in, strap on, and let's go. Let's start with elemental ammo properties. Now the motion value for elemental ammo is 9 plus 27 element. This is up from 5 plus 27 element in the base game. Dragon ammo was like 2 plus 22 or so. Now I really don't know what it is anymore, so whatever. Scaling elemental ammo is now pretty nice as well. Prior you would cap at like 3 of the element rank, making our cap 35. And now with 6 element we can actually reach 42.5. And that can be further increased to about 47 with the elemental augments. Light bowguns can get augments for element at a rate of 20, 10, 10, and 10 per. Not huge, but scaling elemental ammo is pretty limiting, so this is kind of nice. So our old cap of 35 element is now a cap of 45 or 46 when you get the custom augment as well. It's about a 30% increase in elemental damage from high rank to master rank. Not only that, but we did get that buff in raw, which is not to be underestimated. Jumping from 5 to 9 raw motion value is crazy, especially when you realize that elemental can pierce. So a 9 motion value is almost what a normal 1 does, except that it pierces. So if you hit 2 or 3 times on a monster, that's a free normal 2 or normal 3 shot depending on how bad the hit zones are. The raw increase is so nice that scaling raw is actually a pretty viable way to scale your elemental ammo damage for some odd reason. I don't know why. I'm not Capcom, but okay, whatever. Now, speaking of the pierce aspect, they changed that from base game to world. Now, in the base game, elemental would hit once per hit zone it traveled across, which was kind of interesting. It's why Thunder was just dominant on Kulve She had so many gold pieces, plus it could pierce and hit her underneath the coat. That's why you saw so many hits light up. Now, other monsters, it was kind of a meme at best for the entirety of the base game. You can get a few hits here and there, but it's mostly just not worth it. Now in Iceborne, it pierces kind of like pierce ammo in that it just ticks over distance. Not sure why they changed it, but again, whatever. It can hurt more now though, so that's cool. Now shooting down monsters' bodies can get you multiple hits across the body. Likewise, crossing wings can get you many hits across both wings. Also, power barrel. It indirectly helps your damage by making our tick rate a little bit closer for elemental ammo, so we get more hits in per shot. It says it works for pierce, but I've tried elemental both with and without power barrel, and it's kind of noticeable, especially on Luna. It definitely works on elemental pierce. So power barrel is pretty much going to be a must-have for all elemental sets. Now, a side note, don't worry too much about the critical distance on elemental. That only affects the raw portion, so unless you're scaling that, don't really mind it. And don't really bother with close range or long range mods either. Again, they only scale the raw. Now let's move on to the ammo, very specifically the the item ammo. So we can now make more, which is fantastic. We can carry 60 rounds, and fire, water, and ice can carry 20 of their respective herbs, each which crafts 6 ammo apiece. So you get 180 rounds on top of spare shot and true spare shot procs. Now thunder is the same, but you can only carry 10 thunderbugs and they just craft 12 at a time, so just be mindful of that. Now I bring this up because of one thing, craft all. Like stickies, this is still a trap. If you keep crafting ammo all the time when you don't really need it, you're going to be losing out on rounds by overcrafting. And since there's crafts of 6 or 12 at a time, you could be losing 2 to 5 rounds by carelessly crafting ammo all willy-nilly. So I also recommend having craft 1 on radial, since you can do it just every other clip or so while you reload, and you should be golden. And trust me, you need to conserve your ammo as much as possible. Alright, so we did motion value, ammo behavior, crafting. Okay, I got one more thing to discuss before we move on to weapons and setups, and that is the elemental gameplay. So most of your damage is coming from both elemental and the piercing aspect of it. For the most part, besides like one hit zone, usually it's the face for gunners, monsters have just kind of garbage raw hit zones for gunner. Would you really spend the time softening up a garbage hit zone just to make the raw portion of your elemental ammo be a little bit stronger? Probably not, right? Likewise, for a good hit zone like the face, if it's already good and a large portion of your damage comes from piercing and elemental, will that extra bump in raw really be worth the time spent tenderizing? Well, again, in most cases, no, it's not really worth it. There are some monsters like Tigrex and Argakuga who topple on their arms, which have terrible hit zones, so softening those up so you can use weakness exploit and add more raw to cause more topples is kind of a good call. Now what I'm getting at is that you really have to actively think and know about the monster for your element. Where are the good zones? How do you want to shoot your emote so that it hits most of the juicy parts? Things like that. So depending on the monster, you may want different things. Like maybe you don't want weakness exploit. You can get max bind instead, have 30% affinity, not worry about tenderizing, and this will affect the entire length of the shot, not just the good hit zone. This will help even out your critical element damage. Max might can be used on elemental sets because we can kind of safely walk around from a lot of attacks, and you can kind of just keep max might up most of the time. Again, I say you can use it, doesn't mean you should, but you can. I mean, maybe you don't even want crit at all. As I said, buffing the raw portion is also pretty viable, and you can forgo crit element to focus on just that half. Trust me, there's just way too many situations to think about. I just want to pepper you with some thoughts before we get into weapons and sets. Now let me start by saying, like spreads, there are a ton of options here. Like a ton. Probably more than spreads. Basically, every elemental bowgun has the option of going non-crit, crit, or true crit. Now the crit element multiplier for light bowgun is 1.25 times, and the true critical mod is 1.4 times. This is not a huge bump in damage, but it's decent. Now, but because of this, critical element sets and true critical element sets are not too far apart on their damage per shot. Nominal set bonus is kind of lackluster, to be honest. I didn't really make any of those sets because it just didn't really work out. So I just kind of scrapped that idea. Now I brought this up because depending on what you're doing, you can either focus on the raw side with no crit, or you can run elemental focus sets with true crit, or a mix of the two with like crit element and spare shot. I'll give examples on what to use and with what, but for the most part I just kind of stay with the elemental side. Now first up for the elemental archetypes, we have the standard rapid fire bowguns. Like base games, these still require 3 recoil mods to have recoil 2, and they have normal reload, typically having around 4 rounds in the mag, and you can use your last mod slot for a power barrel. Going this route is basically means nothing changed if you played elemental in base game. You're doing the exact same thing in Iceborne. Now these are my baseline bowguns. They perform pretty well since rapid fire is pretty good for conserving ammo, and they typically all run true critical element. Now crit for true crit is pretty close on these sets. Rapid fire element doesn't have any ammo problems since they basically have double the clip sizes of non-rapid fire setups. Now I still prefer to run spare shot here when I can, but it's kind of hard to fit on some stuff. Silver Soul allows fire to run spare shot charm thankfully, and water and thunder can use sticks because it has free spare shot and they can run elemental charms and stuff. But for ice, I use Beototus. Now Beototus can either forego spare shot and just run true critical element, or you can drop that and just run base critical element and spare shot charm. It's up to you. I think spare shot edges out true critical element slightly, but either choice here is fine. All these bowguns pretty much play exactly the same. You don't really need to tenderize monsters since a huge majority of your damage is elemental, so you can just keep wailing on the monster. Ultimately, these bowguns are probably going to be the most stable and well-rounded, but I don't think they offer much that stickies can't already do. Now next up is single shot light bowguns. Now if you're asking why, well, it's simple. Recoil 1 and fast reload beats rapid fire recoil 2 and normal reload by a lot. Now we've known this forever. Now the problem in base game was that we didn't have enough combines to get through a lot of monsters. Like I ran Luna with a single shot ice light bowgun in base game, but I had nowhere near enough ammo to do AT Luna. Anyway, yeah, single shots are just way higher DPS. Now what's crazy is that these two have huge clip sizes for light bowgun, like clip 7 and fast reload. It's nasty. It's so nasty that you'd think you don't even need spread shot. And while, yeah, on paper you don't really get much DPS increase with spare shot, you still need it because of the ammo capacity. Maybe not all the time, but if you think you have 180 shots, if you could land every single one at 150 damage a pop, which is like 70 plus 2 pierces, then you could crank out about 2700 damage, which should be enough to take down pretty much any monster, but that is a best case scenario. Monsters move, you miss, enrage versus non-enraged damage, it's all up in the air. So having spare shot gives you on average another 50 rounds, which is way comfier. True spare shot may not be needed, but that's also going to depend largely on what you're doing. So sets can apply for both. There's also only one solid option for single fire light bowguns anyway, so yay. For fire, we do have the odd one here, which is Anjanet's light bowgun. Because of the high raw and negative affinity, honestly we don't even need to bother with crit here. A raw focus set running true spare shot hits only slightly less than a set with spare shot and crit element, probably around 3 to maybe 5 damage less a shot, not that much. But you also don't have to worry about crits, you don't have to tenderize, you don't have to worry about weakness exploit, or any of that stuff. Now, true critical element hits about as hard, but you also have to drop a lot of raw boosting skills to get the critical stills, and with Fulgur's negative 20% affinity, you're reaching only around 55 to 85% with tenderizing. Honestly, not really seeing it. They're pretty close, but the non-critical setup, just point and shoot, no tendy, no crits, it's just simple and consistent. So that's kind of the odd one out. For ice, we run Barioth Light Bowgun. It's got a lot of innate crits, so building a spare shot and critical element set works pretty well here. Again, you could run true critical element, but you'd be missing out on spare shot, and at that point you'd need to run a charm for elemental damage, and while I'm sure there are some lower tier monsters you can finish without spare shot, it's just much easier to build with spare shot. Once you get to the min-maxing stage where you can plan out how many shots you actually need, then you can decide if you want it or not, but for now, just put spare shot on. Now for Thunder, we run Namiel, a great bowgun even on the elemental side. Kieran's arms really help out the Thunder sets, so we're running spare shot and critical element again here. You could run true critical element, but same thing, Silver Soul set is pretty bad, so you're going to be dropping a lot of stuff to make it work. Other than that, I typically run the same setup on every single shot light bowgun. 2 recoil mods, a reload mods, a power barrel, everything's else the same. Now for water, so the water bowgun's ironically Kieran, but here's the thing. Kieran bowgun has low raw, no affinity, no slots, and it's rare 11, which is awful for augments, and it has no custom augments. It's a really bad bowgun. It's so bad, in fact, that I don't even think it's worth using. I'd rather stick to rapid fire water with sticks or the Nightshade Pals. Seriously, I just pass on this one, don't worry about it. By now you're probably wondering why I've yet to mention Dragon Ammo. Well, it's simple. As strong as Dragon Ammo is, we sadly can only craft 10 of them still. And having a total of 13 is nowhere near enough damage to build around. They're cool, but we need more, seriously. Plus, we don't have like decay for a free critical element, so building for split damage is kind of rough. So without that too, it's just not really worth using right now. I'm sure Tetsufi or Randall will do something with them, but I'm just not interested in Dragon right now. Another missing item here is evade reload light bowguns. So there are a few light bowguns that have rapid fire element with like a clip size of 2 or 3 and slow reload, like Zinogre and Volcana. Now obviously they're meant for evade reload setups. Just don't do it, there's no point. They don't even get usable recoil 1. I just don't see it. Now for heavy bowgun, so a few things you need to know about heavy bowgun and elemental. First off is that their true crit elemental modifier is way higher than light bowgun. It's around 1.6 to 1.7. So true critical element is pretty much always the go-to here. I was hitting Volcana for about 100 to 110 per hit plus pierces. It's kind of great. Also, yes, scope does affect elemental ammo, but sadly, just the raw part. So don't get your hopes up here. Now Randall Deora made some really good use of Heroic's ice heavy bowgun on Shara Ishvalda, so he could forego any of the tenderizing. This is kind of a stretch for me because the only reason that this was actually usable was the fact that Shara is so damn huge that he can get like 5 pierces on that ice shot. It's kind of crazy. So giant things like Shara, Xeno, Kolv, Behemoth would probably get crazy number of hits and it would work out. Now for the bowguns themselves, pretty much any heavy bowgun with a good clip size here works, but I still stuck with Luna's bowguns here. Styx has free spare shot and amazing slots, makes making sets way easier. And Blaze also has some pretty good slots and affinity, plus these two cover all 4 of your elemental MOs, and Blaze also has guts, so you can set up heroics super easily. There are probably some others like Volcana for ice, Glaf and Zora for fire, or Namiel for water that are also adequate, but I don't think they're going to make that much of a difference, to be honest. Now the other thing about elemental heavy bowgun is that yeah, it works, but I still find it super niche. Pierce is almost as effective in every single aspect, and spreads just kind of crush everything once you min-max it. So while there are some fun fights I'm sure that elemental heavy bowgun can stand out on their own on, I wouldn't really focus too much on them yet. They're still kind of memey, but they work. Now for monsters I'd recommend using elemental ammo on, I'd say Savage Joe, Uragon, Glavinus, Sidaglav because their base raw hit zones are terrible, Diablos, Nargacuga and Tigrix, Silver and Gold Rats because again those hit zones are terrible and those wings are pretty juicy. Now Ebony Odo may work, Namiel and Volcana for sure, and Shara Ishvalda. Actually that's actually a pretty good list now that I think about it. Not that these monsters are the best with Elemental, just that Elemental wouldn't be terrible here. Sticky will probably beat out a lot of these anyway, but if you really want to play Elemental, go for it. At least it's usable now, not like in base world. Now on a final, one last note I'd like to rant about. In the Iceborne beta, I was very, very excited for Elemental Bowguns, because in the beta, we had a light bowgun with 1 recoil mod that had rapid fire recoil 1 elemental ammo. That was so fucking amazing to use. I could not wait to use them in Iceborne. Sadly, that was the beta, and I knew those bowguns were not going to be accurate to launch since they could use all the ammos. I had still hoped we would get a recoil 1 rapid fire elemental bowgun, maybe even later down the line, but right now I'd just like to point out that we missed out on something awesome there. Countermine setup with elemental bowgun was the most fun I've had playing light bowgun, and I'm really sad that we can't do that in full game. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you all for watching, and good luck out there, hunters, and whatever you may be hunting.